Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, and today I will be painting watercolor chrysanthemums, and not just painting but actually coloring in one of the pages from my new coloring book that I released just a few days ago on Etsy. It's a digital book, it's a PDF file, and I call it a book because I set it up as an actual book for your convenience with the introduction part, some ideas for supplies that you can use, some tips on how you can transfer illustrations to watercolor paper, and then all the pages with illustrations together in one file, so you don't have to keep track of all of the different files. What you get there is 15 hand-drawn flower illustrations that I did with ink and then scan at very high resolution. You can print them as many times as you want basically and color in with any supplies as you want. And if your printer takes thicker paper like mine does, you can even print directly on your watercolor paper or transfer. If you don't have a printer, you can transfer using different transferring techniques, and I have more tips on that inside of the book. And you know, coloring is a very relaxing activity for me because I don't have to stress about creating a drawing with composition and looking for reference. I can just relax and enjoy having fun with coloring pencils or markers or watercolors. And I will be posting more of these coloring videos, so you can grab a copy of a book and color in with me. And so for today's video I decided to use the chrysanthemums illustration, and I already did just a little bit for the first video that I posted about the book, which is the video just before this one. And the lines that you see here on the illustration, if you can see this well, they're showing up a little bit too much, I would say. And if you are already looking at the book, you will see that I recommend, if you're printing on your watercolor paper, to reduce the opacity of the illustration. If you have any kind of a picture app or photo app, you will be able to reduce the opacity just a little bit. And for this one, I think I went down to 30% opacity, which is basically like a pencil, like a graphite pencil. But you can even reduce it further than this. And if you don't like printing, or if you don't have a printer, you can follow all of my other techniques for transferring, and then you will just have the pencil outline on your watercolors. Or you can print this on the regular paper, and here I have this stack of papers just on the regular printer paper, and this is printed at the regular opacity, and you can color in with pencils or markers on this paper. And I have wreath like this too, so they're all arranged in different styles. Some flowers are individuals, some are grouped in arrangement, some are wreaths. And so you can see this one, the chrysanthemums illustration, was printed at the regular opacity, so it's a little bit darker, but you can reduce the opacity and you'll have lighter marks. Oops, flew away. And I also have full sheets in there with peonies, sheets like this one, so you can fill up the whole page. And they're all sized for the standard size of the printer paper, which is 8.5 inches by 11, but they scanned at the high resolution, so you can pretty much scale them to any size that you want, to whatever your printer can handle. And you see I have some individual flowers like these ones. So you have a lot of options. Do whatever you want, print as many times as you want, and we can color in together. So the supplies that I'm going to be using today are my usual watercolors, that I set up into a custom palette, and you can see a video when I do that. I think I've added a few more colors since I posted the video, but I will be mentioning all the colors that I'm using today anyway. My brushes, most likely gonna use just a few. I'm not gonna be doing the background, I'm just gonna be doing the flower. I have my spray bottle just to refresh my colors. I have my 2 jars of water, one for cleaning the brush and one's for picking up clean water. And I have my paper towels. And that's it. Oh, and I have a scrap piece of watercolor paper where I'm just gonna be swatching my colors and testing them. And let's go. Let's see how it goes. So I'm gonna start with just the 2 brushes, size 3 and size 4. One is a silver white and one is a cotton. And I found sizes to be different for every brand, so just go with whatever you're comfortable using. Might have to go into even smaller one. I'm not sure right now, because some of the details are very small, especially right at the center of the flower. And I had an idea of making a very vibrant chrysanthemum, like pinkish and purplish. So I'm gonna start with my water here. I'm gonna start, no, actually, I'm gonna put my water closer to me. Yeah, it's right here. So I'll start with making a mix of the pink color. And I'm gonna use some of my, quinacridone magenta. This is probably gonna be too pink. So I will actually save this here, this little puddle, in case I need something more saturated. And I'm gonna add a little bit of quinacridone red. It's a little cooler than cadmium red, but it's warmer than magenta. And you can see the difference. This one, let me dilute it a little bit more. So this one is the, yeah, this is good. The quinacridone magenta and quinacridone red, and this one is just the quinacridone magenta. So this is a much cooler color. And for the darker parts on the inside of the petals, I'm gonna add just a tiny bit of blue, and I'm thinking ultramarine blue just to keep it more on the warmer side. And I'm gonna mix it with more quinacridone red. And I'm probably gonna need to remix the colors as I go along, as I use more of them. But this is just for now. That's good. And I might even make one mix a little darker with using Payne's Gray, ultramarine blue, and actually alizarin crimson. Let's try alizarin crimson. It's darker. It's a little darker, you see? It's a little darker than that. And I'm also gonna make one mix more on the bluer side. More like a lilac color. Yeah, that's good. So these are probably going to be my 3 main mixes, and if I'm adding other colors, so far I've used Payne's Gray, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, quinacridone magenta, and quinacridone red. But if I need to use any other colors, I will mention them as I go along. So I'm gonna keep this one close with me, and I will start with this bottom flower chrysanthemum because it's the larger one. The one on top is a little smaller, so I'll maybe just speed up the video as I go through the smaller one. And let's go. I'm gonna start with the outer parts of the petals. And let me zoom in a little bit. Now that you know the colors, you know what I'm using anyway. So I'm gonna zoom in on the flower. And I will start with the outer parts on the top. And the paper I'm using today is a Canson XL watercolor paper. And it's 140 pounds. It is not a cotton paper, so you have to be careful with how much water you apply. It doesn't really take water well without stretching. But since I'm going to be working in sections, as my outer parts of the petals are drying, I'm going to start going with the inner parts of the petals. So I'm not going to be covering the whole sheet at the same time, and that will help me out a little bit with not getting my paper buckling too much. So as I mentioned, this is a very relaxing activity for me because right now I can just enjoy coloring. I've already done the drawing part. Well, you don't have to do the drawing part anyway. You just can download the files. And this illustration in particular took me about, I don't know, 8 hours at least to create. Just the sketch alone, just a rough pencil sketch, took me about 2 hours. Sorry, 2 hours. And if you follow me on Instagram, you could see the progress that I was making with this one. So I'm just using the same pinkish mix of the quinacridone red and quinacridone magenta, and just dilute it with water to a very light shade, because I'm later gonna take an even smaller brush and add all of the creases that you see, and I just have the tiny outlines in there to help you navigate through the creases and keep track of the direction, because when you're working with a big flower like this, and this one I actually printed on the 9x12 paper, so it's a little bit bigger than the actual file size, the 8.5x11, but you can scale it up to any size that you want. So when a flower is so big, it gets a little hard to keep track of the direction in which these petals are going, especially when they're curling up in all the different directions. And that's what I like this flower for, but it can start getting a little bit confusing, so that's why I have all of these small outlines when we start adding different details in those different lines, because these petals are very textured. So I'm just going around. And I want to have rather a crisper look on this illustration, so that's why I'm letting my upper petals dry while I'm working on these, and then I'll come back to them once I'm doing my inner sides, because the inner sides will be much darker. And you can of course go very loose with these. You can just let the watercolors flow and do its job. But I just want to add some more details to this. And actually, since I've covered up this section of petals, I can let, while it's wet, I can let more color sort of create shadow in there. And you can leave some white of the paper showing through, and that's just gonna create a little bit of the highlights and help you add the definition. So like especially the middle part of the petal. You can leave a little bit of the highlight there. And I'm fighting this brush to be a little bit larger than I would like to use, so I'm kind of fighting how bulky it sort of feels for this size of the illustration. But that also helps me to create sort of little looser illustration, because otherwise I'll be going into very, very tiny details with this. And you can start blending in the shadows on the insides of the petals even now while the paint is wet. But I'm just gonna wait until it dries a little bit, because I'm just going after a little crisper look with more detail. So as I mentioned, you get a total of 15 illustrations, and you have a choice of individual flowers and flower bouquets and a full sheet of peonies like I mentioned before. So whatever you feel like doing, you have some options. Okay, so I think I am done with the outer parts, and that was fairly quick. Let me lighten this up a little bit. Okay, so now I am gonna take a smaller brush. This one is, I think, size 3. This is Cotman Winsor Newton. And I'm gonna take my purple mix that I have here with ultramarine blue and quinacridone red. And I think I'll add a little bit more of alizarin crimson in there. So here you can see, just adding a little bit more alizarin crimson to add a little more saturation. And alizarin crimson is the dark, nice sort of rich color that is a cooler red, but it mixes very nice with blues and has kind of very rich undertone. And I'm gonna make more of this one. Just so I have a more concentrated mix. Okay, now we can test. Oops. Now we can test the color. So let's test out it looks deeper. I think even more alizarin, more red in there. Yeah, all looks nice. Okay, so I'm gonna work in the same pattern starting from the top, and I'm actually gonna start with sort of a mid-tone value. I will dilute this just a little bit because I want to reserve some space for adding details in the creases inside. So I don't want to go too dark just yet. And also I'm controlling the amount of water that I'm adding, so it's not flowing too much and it's not creating puddles. So I'm being careful when going around the other petals so that I preserve the crispiness of the look. And these chrysanthemums petals, they have sort of very distinctive linear curvy look, so I don't want to cover up some of these curves because that would change so the flowy pattern that they have. It gets a little tedious when you go into these little details, but I like the process. I like it. And you can add a little more color to some of the petals. You can create variations. I think I'm gonna mix a little bit of the blue too. A bit of my blue mix there too, just for some details there. So my paint is already starting to dry, and you see I'm able to create crisper lines. And if you think you went too dark on some of the details, you can just clean your brush, dry it a little bit, not too much, and then you go over with sort of a damp brush and you pick it up. You can wet it a little bit more and go over it and even blend it if you want to, so it doesn't have such a harsh contrast. But I actually like this look. And don't forget to add the shadow to the parts that are sort of turning away from light and the parts that are being overlapped by other petals. So sort of right under the curve where it curves. And right on the inside of the petal. My watercolors keep drying. I'm gonna spray it a little bit. Maybe because I'm working so slow. I'm a really slow painter. But I like to take my time. We don't need to rush right now. I'm gonna add a little bit more of the red to the mix that I'm gonna put in right on the inside of the flower. So I'm mixing some cadmium red, some alizarin crimson, and some burnt umber. And this creates a very deep, sort of a bloody red. No, it's not too red. I think I can add more alizarin crimson to this. Yeah, it's more like this. So this will create the accent on the inside of the flower, the inner part, and sort of separate it a little bit more from other petals. I can add even more alizarin crimson and more burnt umber. And also I'm gonna go back and mix this into some of the other petals so that it looks more united. So this Canson paper doesn't really hold the water for too long. It absorbs it very quickly. If you work with more expensive paper like ours or any cotton-based paper, you will notice that the water stays on the surface longer and you're able to mix colors on the paper itself. But on this paper I have to keep in mind, if I want to mix the color on the paper, I have to do it while it's wet. And now I'm sort of going back and forth between my darker purple mix and my red mix, and I'm just adding variations of shadows. And even though I like detailed illustrations, I'm not at all attempting botanical illustrations or anything very detailed of that sort, so I'm not going after correct flowers, colors, let's say, and I like to experiment with my colors, so you can do something more realistic in your use of colors, something that's closer to the original colors of this flower. And you can just go on Pinterest and find any reference pictures and base your colors off of that. I feel like shadows are taking me longer to paint because I'm trying to be very careful going around the lighter values of the petals, the outer parts of the petals. No, I'm still going over them in some parts, but trying to be very careful. And I'm remixing some of my colors, using the same colors again, but just because I'm started using up a lot of the pigment and I started getting very light values. And I'm gonna go over the outer part of the petal and create a little more definition on them by shading in some of the lines on them, and also just creating kind of descriptive shadows at the point where they are curving. But right now I like to work with one color at a time, sort of, so it's easier for me to keep track of what I'm doing. And I'm gonna turn this around so I don't smudge. I'm working with basically the same colors, the ultramarine blue, the quinacridone red, quinacridone magenta, alizarin crimson, but I'm varying the concentration of each color for the mix, just to create better variety of mixes. There's some tiny spots right between these petals when you see some of the inner parts showing through. So I'm just trying to cover up some of those. Okay, so now it looks like I've covered all of the inner parts. So I'm gonna go back to my outer pink petals and I'm gonna create a little bit of the lilac mix, a very light mix, using the same colors that I already have on my palette. And I'm just gonna go back to creating a little bit more of the definitions on them. Maybe more quinacridone magenta. This is the color that I'm going for. See, very, very light mix. And sort of just right in the parts where the petal is turning away from the light, and also in these creases to just add some definition to these creases. And I'm gonna darken a little bit these petals right the inside because they sort of get covered up in the shadow by all the other petals. I think I'll add a little bit more of the pink to it, so a little bit more of my quinacridone magenta. Yeah, I think I like it more with the pink in it. I'm just gonna go over some of the ones that I already did, just to add some pink to them. And especially gonna shade right between the petals. Let me bring it closer a little bit. I don't think this can get any closer. So just right where these petals are overlapping. To create a little more definition. And if you like a softer look, you can just use a lighter mixture with more water. But I'm actually liking how this is turning out. It has more of the illustrative style to it. And I think I'm even gonna take a smaller outline brush and go over into those creases even more. And I will soften up just some of these lines. Just so that we have kind of a better gradient between values. It's just starting to take shape. And if you want to go even more detailed, you can work with more layers, sort of create gradients by having more values. So instead of having just 3 basic values like highlights, mid-tone, and shadow, you can create more transitional values that sort of fall between them, and that will create even more natural look. But that would take much longer to paint. I don't know if I have that much patience. I mean, in oil, so it probably would. But I feel like watercolor is such a spontaneous medium that makes me want to use it that way. It makes me want to have an instant result with it without having to work with layers and layers and layers of paint. And darken a few of those petals. I'm going over some of the parts already colored. Just as the color is drying a little lighter, I want to add some more shading to it. Just for the sake of having better definition, and I'm working very close to the painting. I'm basically with my nose in it. So from the distance it might look better, but I just feel like I want to add some more. It's too strong. Some more definition in there while I'm working on it. This pink might be too strong. I think I need a little bit more the ultramarine blue in it, so it's more like a lilac color. and just a little bit of black and red. And I don't usually blend my shadows and midtones or highlights, but just sometimes if I'm introducing a new color into the shadow that's a little different, I might blend it a little bit just so it looks better together. Or you don't have to blend, you can just leave it as it is. Okay, I think I've covered all of them. And now that I look at it, I see that these petals here, the lilac ones, are standing out a little too much. So as I go in with more details on the shadow, I want to cover them up a little more. So again, I'm using the same colors that I've already mentioned, just in different concentrations. A little more of the reds, a little more of the blues. And I want to have some of the definition. Right on the insides there. And now I'm gonna add a light wash just over these petals on the inside, so to put them more deeper into the shadow. Okay, so here is one flower, and I can now move on to the other one. I'm probably gonna speed it so we're not staying here for 2 hours. And I'm gonna do the same thing for the small bud. For the green parts, I'm gonna use some forest green and cadmium yellow. So this is the color that I'm going for. And for the darker parts, I'm gonna mix forest green with gamboge, which is M. Graham color. This, I'm gonna probably use a little bit more of the forest green. the darker shadow, and just a tiny bit of cobalt blue. Okay, I'm probably gonna make a little bit more of the lighter mix. Here is my finished illustration. Let me give you a closer look. So here's the finished look, and I hope you guys got a chance to paint along with me, either coloring in the illustration from my book or doing something of your own. And if you did, let me know how it went. If you want to share it on social media, then use the hashtag #KChristyColoring, and I will share it on my Instagram in my stories. Thank you guys for checking out my video. I hope you liked it. Subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and all the good stuff, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!